Now I'd like to introduce you all to our voice of inspiration. Dorothy, who's come on camera with us, is an alumni of the Renfrew Center, Spring Lane, and Center City, Philadelphia. She is a proud aunt to her 8-year-old niece and 6-year-old nephew. For work, Dorothy is a clinical research compliance auditor at a university hospital in Philadelphia. And in her free time, she likes to paint and play board games with her family. So I will turn it over to Dorothy to tell you all a little bit about her journey. And if we have time at the end, we'll also be doing a brief Q&A, and you can submit those questions into the chat. Thank you all. Dorothy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you to Renfrew for giving me this opportunity. I really feel honored. My eating disorder journey started as a child. I've been in a larger body since I was about 6 years old. I've struggled with depression starting in early childhood as well. My peers bullied me through ignoring me and refusing to play with me. School staff made negative comments and excluded me because of my size. At home, my brother would make comments like I ruined my body because I had stretch marks. I received mixed messages about my body from my parents. My dad encouraged me to grow up big and strong, which I took to mean to be in a larger body like the rest of my dad's side of the family. However, my mom and dad, who both were chronic dieters, suggested that I diet to control my weight. One diet stuck with me that had free foods, things like unsweetened tea and celery sticks. The problem was I was given little direction on how to diet outside of that. I just assumed that I could eat very little that wasn't on the free foods list. On the other hand, enjoying and critiquing food was a major part of my family dynamic. My brother, who was 6 years older than me, knew since he was starting high school that he wanted to be a chef. So I grew up constantly critiquing food, whether it was my brother practicing for a competition or just some new meal he wanted to try. My dad and brother would argue a lot about the right way to cook. My dad preferred home style type meals, whereas my brother was being taught to cook in a restaurant style as he would need to for his career. Ultimately, this tore my dad and my brother apart. And then if the food arguing wasn't enough, my dad, who had a lifelong struggle with acid reflux disease, developed esophageal cancer that caused most food not to be able to enter his stomach. Our once lively and talkative family dinner table became silent in an attempt to keep my dad relaxed in the hope that at least some of the food would pass into his stomach. This only partially worked, as he would still throw up several times during dinner into the garbage disposal. I became repulsed by the family dinner table, but I never said anything. After all, my dad was very sick and couldn't help it. I felt so guilty for feeling repulsed. I felt guilty that I was able to eat when my dad couldn't, no matter how much he wanted to. My dad passed away when I was 16, only 6 short months after his initial cancer diagnosis. I didn't know how to grieve. I didn't know how to cope. I felt so guilty that I could even eat. I started dieting even more, which meant more of those free foods from that list. But I still ate family dinner. I didn't want to come across ungrateful. And then I finished high school and I decided to go away to college, which gave me a sense of independence with my food that I wanted but was unprepared for. I was finally not asked to critique my food. No one was telling me to diet or making dinner for me. No one was checking in on my eating habits. It took less than a month away at college for what was sporadic dieting to turn into a majorly restricted eating disorder. But was it really that bad? I was getting compliments on my weight. People were asking me how I did it. No one was expressing concern with the drastic weight change that occurred. However, I couldn't maintain that level of restriction for long if I wanted to maintain my grades and stay in college. So I went to making ever-changing rules about what I could eat, when I could eat, how I needed to compensate for eating. I was pre-med in college, and that was an intense program. In addition, I became a leader in my sorority-like organization, which also demanded a lot. I was exhausted by my last semester. I labeled it as senioritis, but really it was years of restriction and purging catching up to me. I almost failed a class my last semester. I barely remember my graduation, but I was so relieved I finally finished college. I could rest, I could take a break from the intensity of the schoolwork and the extracurricular activities. I decided that I needed to stop my eating disorder, which I plan to do on my own at home. I did quickly realize that that wasn't going to happen, but I wasn't really sure how to ask for help. I really lost hope that I could get better. So that just led me to spiraling even further into the eating disorder. For years, my eating disorder kept my mind away from my depression. But a combination of my work situation at the time and just the worsening eating disorder made my depression a lot worse. So I decided to seek therapy for my depression. I thought a weekly therapy session was going to be sufficient. During my intake, the therapist picked up that maybe my eating disorder was a little worse than I thought it was. And she referred me to their practice's eating disorder program. I didn't really think that was needed, but it was like a prerequisite for getting a therapist. They suggested I try IOP, which I was very hesitant about. I didn't think that was necessary. I also didn't want my mom to find out, just with like doing an intensive program. It's kind of hard to hide exactly what you're doing. I was allowed to try a weekly support group with, in addition to seeing an individual therapist and a nutritionist weekly. And that did bring me to a level of stability with my eating disorder. However, being that my eating disorder is my main coping skill, or was my main coping skill, removing it left me with no way to cope with my depression. My depression worsened and I had to go to the hospital. I was there 10 days and I missed my niece's first birthday party. But I was able to bring my mom and my cousin in as supports in addition to my best friend. And I also found a really great motivator for recovery, which was my niece. I responded well to the psychiatric medication I was put on, and I discharged without an intensive treatment plan. However, I did have my mom and my cousin and my best friend who became very protective of me and my mental health. After a few months of unemployment following being hospitalized, I finally found a job in clinical research. I eventually transitioned to the cancer research department. It was a great job. However, it was very emotionally taxing to read and record deadly cancer stories every day. The despair I felt for the research participants just really contributed to depression relapses and eating disorder relapses. My mental health was falling apart. My eating disorder wasn't helping me cope with the depression anymore. No matter which eating disorder symptoms I used. With my therapist and nutritionist, we decided that residential treatment was needed. After years of going between general mental health and eating disorder IOP, Anyway, um, so I decided residential treatment was needed. Luckily, Spring Lane wasn't too far from where I live. So my mom could participate, and my other family members could participate in treatment in person and not just over the phone. My mom visited every weekend. She attended multifamily MFG and the support group. She was concerned that this first residential treatment was going to be the start of going in and out of residential treatment, as some of my peers were experiencing at treatment. I also thought that I would only need to go through residential treatment once. So at Renfrew, I learned so much. I really felt drawn to the values vault activity. I was just learning what I wanted out of life, how to separate my eating disorder values from my core self values. The UT structure itself, I really like structured activities and organization. It gave me a lot of tools to put in my toolbox that actually helped to address issues, not just distract from them. It provided an organized approach to treatment that I didn't feel other treatment I received provided. So after that first residential treatment, I stepped down to non-Renfrew PHP and IOP. While that did help me remain stable, it didn't reinforce the UT model skills that I learned. And I was still struggling with body image and the idea that weight loss was a life goal for me. For a year or so, motivated by my desire to get a jaw surgery to fix my underbite, I was stable. I knew that I needed to eat properly to heal properly. But after healing from the jaw surgery, I saw a weight loss doctor. She put me on an appetite suppressing medication and a restrictive diet plan to lose weight. I thought I could make losing weight and recovery work together, but that backfired and I spiraled into a relapse. It took a few months to be convinced to stop the appetite suppressant, and then even a few more months to be convinced that I needed to go to treatment again. Fortunately, Renfrew's Center City site in Philadelphia opened up only a few months prior to my relapse. And I work in Center City, Philadelphia, so it was very convenient for me to go to their IOP. I did well. I relearned the UT skills. I incorporated it into my life better than residential treatment. And I finished IOP one day early because the day that would have been my last day of treatment was the first day of virtual treatment for the pandemic. So the pandemic offered new challenges that I didn't prepare for. I don't think anybody prepared for, but I built my recovery plan that I would be in the office 5 days a week. I didn't prepare for working at home. So by the summer, I did need to seek residential treatment again. I was ashamed that I needed to seek residential treatment again, just with my mom's comments about going in and out of treatment. I didn't want that for myself, but I also knew that it was okay for me to seek residential treatment again. So this time when I did residential, I transitioned to the PHP and Renfrew PHP and IOP, and that really helped solidify the UT model for me. So I was doing well until about 2 weeks before I was set to discharge from IOP. My depression got activated overnight, no apparent cause. My therapist later described it as a scary change. I I started a general mental health IOP after discharging from Renfrew. Unfortunately, the virtual format and size of that group just didn't really work for me, and my depression just was continuing to get worse. I decided to try residential treatment for general mental health, and I picked a place a couple hours from my house, but they suggested I go to a site farther away. Because the site farther away could support my eating disorder recovery. I was hesitant, but I thought I was doing what was best for my eating disorder recovery in addition to my depression recovery. It turns out that that facility I went to was a horrible choice. Their nutritionist was not eating disorder specialized. Their phone rules were really strict. They weren't relaying messages my family and friends were leaving for me. I did really wind up feeling abandoned by my supports. And just instead of getting better, I just went further and further into my depression. I was reporting like depression urges to, I guess, the staff daily. And this was not being relayed to my individual therapist. And she was surprised when she finally got that indication, and she kind of put the blame on me, like I didn't report it. They were telling me that I wasn't working hard enough. My insurance decided I didn't need residential treatment anymore when I was about 3 weeks into what I thought was going to be about a 4-week stay. I didn't have aftercare set up just because it was so sudden of a denial. I didn't really want to do their PHP program, but they manipulated me into doing it with the threat of paying even one day out of pocket for residential treatment. I found out after discharge that the PHP program set me up with a unlicensed therapist. He was really a life coach, and there was also a violation of my confidentiality, which made me very untrusting of the house staff, and I didn't feel comfortable sharing in groups. I spent a lot of time journaling and doing therapy homework in those individual sessions with my therapist. I talked when I could get a word in, but it was apparent that he wasn't listening to me, no matter how vulnerable I was. When my discharge date arrived, I wasn't any better, but I was ready to go home. I missed Thanksgiving and Christmas for treatment, and I've only gotten worse. Less than 12 hours before I was set to leave, the therapist tried to manipulate me into staying by saying I hadn't done any work while at the facility and I absolutely needed to stay to get better. I wasn't going to be manipulated into continuing treatment there again. I finally made it home. I was way worse than when I left, but I was not going to put myself in a position to be manipulated like that at another facility. I needed eating disorder treatment again because in addition to my depression getting worse, I turned to my eating disorder. My treatment team, my therapist, my nutritionist decided that I needed eating disorder treatment again. And I really wasn't open to the idea of going back to treatment. But my therapist convinced me like I could trust the Center City team. I was traumatized by that other facility. I was lashing out at Renfrew. I was being defiant. I couldn't trust the therapists, but they had so much patience with me, and it was just amazing. I relearned to trust in therapy and therapists. We managed to bring my eating disorder under control and to get to a functional level with my depression. Since finishing Renfrew, I've done EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing to process my trauma from the other treatment center. My depression is well controlled with my medication and mental health routines. I've learned to reach out for support when I start having trouble, and I've been delighted by how my support step up. I'm happy to say that I've been out of intensive eating disorder treatment for over 2 years now.
Dorothy, I'm always struck by your story. I mean, you and I have talked before today, and I said, like, it's just there's so many pieces and so many levels and challenges you went through. And even you're talking about going back to Center City and having that difficulty trusting and still doing it. And I feel like that's such a major piece of just recovery in general, and that idea of holding on to hope, that it's like, okay, I can hope that things are going to get better, that like I'm not always going to feel this mistrust of treatment professionals because of the experiences you had that validly like led to mistrust of treatment professionals. How have you seen that kind of impact in kind of, you said been out of higher level of care treatment for 2 years now. How has life kind of continued going on? How has that hope still stayed with you in those 2 years post treatment?
How has the hope stayed with me?
Or just what has it been like?
Yeah. I think it's been challenging in a good way. I've been branching out. I've been more social. I transitioned to my current job. So I moved away from the cancer research. My current job, not as mentally taxing as, or emotionally taxing anyway, as the job doing cancer research. Yeah, I'm so surprised at my supports, and I think they've really gotten me through these 2 years. I've had near lapses, and where I'm like, the eating disorder is just heavy in my head. And my best friend will like text me at meal times and encourage me like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I've been doing the last 2 years, I guess.
Yeah. What do you think got you? Because you talked about like initially struggling with opening up to your mom and letting her know about treatment. And then you got to that point. What do you think it was that helped you start to open up to your supports more?
I mean, one was definitely necessity. When I went to the hospital, there's no, hiding why. It's like, oh, I'm just going to the psych ward for a bad stomach ache. Like there's no hiding while you're there. I guess you could downplay it. Yeah, I think a lot of boundary setting, a lot of educating, I think, on the eating disorder and on what the best way to help me personally deal with that. And then, yeah, I was really scared to open up to my mom at first. I think the most issue that I thought, I was like worried she would blame herself when this wasn't like, this isn't one person's fault or anything like that. It's a combination of a lot of things. And like, I didn't want her to blame herself. But we work through, our relationship, and now she's a great support for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like it's again, it's that idea of like hope, like hoping that it is going to go better than what you thought, that she's not going to blame herself. And I think, that's the thing I really heard, and why I wanted the rest of the alumni community to hear your story, is that there is so much hope in it, and like this continued movement forward and through, even when it doesn't feel like it's forward, in the hope that it's like, okay, all of this is going to add up to something bigger. And you have had that experience. And I think that's so amazing.